The resort had seen 1,000 honeymoons, couples arriving with that specific brightness that belongs to people standing at the beginning of something, the particular lightness of two people who had just made the largest promise of their lives and have not yet had time to doubt it. The staff knew the signs, the way they held hands through check-in, the way they ordered champagne before unpacking, the way they looked at each other across restaurant tables with the specific attention of people who cannot yet believe their luck. They looked like that, the woman especially. She had arrived with the kind of joy that staff members remember, not performed, not self-conscious, but genuine in a way that comes from a person who has waited for something a long time and finally stopped waiting. She had laughed at the welcome drink. She had taken photographs of the view from the balcony before she had even set down her bag. He had watched her do this with an expression that read, in the ordinary context of honeymoon, as adoration. The staff remembered her. They would remember him differently. It was a housekeeper who first noticed something was wrong on the 5th morning. The Do Not Disturb sign had been on the door since the previous evening. Standard enough. But something about the quality of the silence behind that door, the specific density of it, made her pause at her cart longer than usual. She knocked. Silence. She knocked again. The door opened almost immediately. He was dressed, composed. He had an explanation ready before she had formed a question. His wife was still sleeping. She had not been feeling well. He would let the front desk know if they needed anything. He smiled. He closed the door. The housekeeper stood in the corridor for a moment. She would later describe to investigators as the longest of her life. Then she picked up her radio. She had waited her whole life for this week. He had been planning it far longer than she knew. His name was not important in the way that names are sometimes not important. What mattered was not what he was called, but what he was. And what he was had taken investigators months of patient excavation to fully understand. Because on the surface, on the extended, carefully maintained surface that everyone who knew him experienced, he was exactly what a person hopes to find. He was steady in a way that people who have survived difficult things are steady, not unfeeling, but settled. He did not raise his voice. He did not create drama. He moved through the world with a quiet confidence that communicated to anyone paying the ordinary amount of attention that here was a man who had figured out what mattered and organized his life accordingly. He was attentive in a specific way that disarms careful people, not the performed attentiveness of a man trying to impress, the real thing, or something so close to the real thing that the difference required instruments she did not yet know she needed. He remembered what she told him. He asked follow-up questions days later. He made her feel, in his presence, like the most considered person in the room. She had been careful. There is a moment her closest friend described that captures this precisely. Early in the relationship, before she had made any decision, before she had allowed herself to believe it was becoming something, a previous acquaintance had asked her what she thought of him. She had paused for longer than the question seemed to require. And then she said, "I'm still watching. I don't move until I'm sure." That was who she was. She had a career she had built entirely from her own effort. She had a life that was full before he arrived in it. She had standards she had maintained through previous relationships that had not met them. And she had ended those relationships without apology because she knew what she was looking for and was not willing to settle for less. He had met every standard, not by accident. They had met the way people meet when the world is small enough, through mutual connections, at the kind of gathering that produces more significant relationships than anyone expects. He had not pursued her loudly. He had been present, consistently, without pressure, until his presence became something she looked forward to, and then something she looked for when it was absent. She had fallen in love with his steadiness first, then his attentiveness, then the specific quality of how he listened. Whole body, unhurried, as though what she was saying was the only thing happening in the world at that moment. And somewhere in the second month, when he said something that she would later write in her journal, because it moved her so completely, she had known he was the one. He had said, "I feel most alive when it's just the two of us, away from everyone, like the rest of the world doesn't exist." She had heard devotion. She had written it down as devotion. She had carried it with her as devotion for every month between that evening and the honeymoon. She did not know, could not have known, that she had just heard the first coordinates of a trap being constructed around her. Some words sound like love. Some words are a blueprint. The difficulty is that from the inside, they feel identical. While she was falling in love, something else was happening, not somewhere else. Not in a separate life. He was living in secret, right there, in the same relationship, in the same conversations, in the same careful attentiveness that had made her feel so completely seen. Something else was running underneath all of it, quiet and purposeful, invisible to everyone who was not looking for it. Investigators would spend months reconstructing what that something was. What they found was this. He had been in financial trouble for longer than anyone around him knew. Not the ordinary debt of a person living slightly beyond their means. The specific, structured desperation of a man whose lifestyle had been running significantly ahead of his income for years, who had borrowed against things that could not be replenished, who had made decisions in the past that had quietly closed options he could no longer reopen. The surface of his life communicated stability. The interior was a different calculation entirely. He had a previous relationship that had ended 18 months before he met her. He had given her a version of that ending. Something about incompatibility, about two people who wanted different things, about a mutual recognition that it was not right. It was a clean story, plausible, the kind of account that satisfies without inviting examination. The woman from that relationship told investigators a different story. She said she had left because something had felt wrong in a way she could not articulate at the time, that he had become interested in her finances in ways that felt off. Questions that were reasonable individually, but accumulated into a pattern she could not name until she was out of it, that she had left quickly and quietly and had spent the following year wondering if she had imagined the whole thing. She had not imagined it. And then, the detail that changed everything investigators thought they understood about the timeline of this case. 8 months before the wedding, he had taken out a life insurance policy on her. Not a modest policy. A policy whose coverage amount was significantly larger than their shared financial obligations could reasonably justify. A policy whose beneficiary was him exclusively. A policy purchased during the engagement, after trust was complete, after the relationship was established, but before the marriage that would make him the legal next of kin who could collect without question. Each element held separately for a moment, then together. The timing was not accidental. The amount was not accidental. The positioning of the purchase, far enough before the wedding to appear routine, close enough to the honeymoon to be operative, was not accidental. Each of these three elements individually had an explanation. The financial trouble could be attributed to circumstance. The previous relationship could be attributed to incompatibility. The insurance policy could be attributed to responsible planning. Together they formed something that had no innocent explanation. Together they formed a portrait of a man who had not fallen in love with her, who had identified her. The most dangerous plans are the ones that look, from every angle, like ordinary life. The wedding was everything she had wanted it to be. The venue was warm and filled with the people who had known her longest. The friend who had been there through every previous relationship that had not been right. The family members who had watched her build her life with the quiet pride of people who understood what that building had cost her. The colleagues who knew the specific quality of her dedication and had celebrated alongside her through every milestone she had reached entirely on her own. They welcomed him. That is the detail that would sit with her closest friend for a long time afterward. How completely and genuinely everyone had welcomed him. He had been present at enough gatherings before the wedding that her people had formed their own impressions of him, independent of her. Those impressions were warm. He was easy to talk to. He remembered names. He asked about the things people mentioned once and never expected anyone to retain. He stood at the altar with the expression of a man who had arrived at the moment he had been waiting for. She stood across from him with the expression of a woman who had arrived at the moment she had always deserved. The vows were personal. She had written hers over several weeks, revising them carefully because she wanted to say something true rather than something beautiful. And the result was both. Something that made the room go quiet in particular way rooms go quiet when a person speaks without performance. His vowels were polished, specific, delivered with a steady confidence that had characterized everything about him from the beginning. Her closest friend gave a toast that the table received with laughter, and then silence, and then the specific warmth of people who recognize something true being said about someone they love. She said that she had never seen her friend look the way she looked today. She said that she deserved every single thing this day was promising. The room agreed. He smiled across the table at his new wife and raised his glass. Then they left for the honeymoon. The destination had been a suggestion entirely. An island resort, remote, beautiful. The kind of place that requires a long flight and produces a specific isolation of somewhere that feels genuinely separate from ordinary life. She had agreed without hesitation because it sounded perfect and because the man suggesting it had given her every reason to trust his judgment. She photographed everything at the airport. Her dress, their boarding passes, his hand holding hers across the departure lounge seats. She posted the photographs with a caption about finally. The camera caught everything. It had no way of knowing what it was missing. The first 2 days were everything a honeymoon is supposed to be. The resort was exactly what the photographs had promised. Warm water, white sand, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly more beautiful than it actually is. They ate at the oceanfront restaurant every evening. They spent mornings on the beach. They were, by every visible account from every staff member who would later be interviewed, a happy couple. Attentive, affectionate, visibly in love. She sent photographs home. Her family responded with heart emojis and questions about the food. Her closest friend sent back a voice message that made her laugh loud enough that he looked up from his book. Everything was exactly as it should have been. Then the third day arrived. It began ordinarily. Breakfast at the same table. The same ocean view. The same coffee he ordered without being asked because he had always remembered how she took it. But somewhere between breakfast and mid-morning something shifted in him that she could not name and could not dismiss. He became present the way furniture is present. He answered her questions with the minimum words required. He suggested they stay and rather than join the resort's afternoon excursion. And when she asked why, he said he just wanted it to be the two of them, away from the group, just them. She had heard those words before. In a restaurant in the early months of the relationship, before the engagement, before the wedding, before the long flight to this island. He had said he felt most alive when it was just the two of them, away from everyone, like the rest of the world did not exist. She had written it in her journal. She had carried it as devotion. In a different country, thousands of miles from everyone who knew her, those same words landed differently. She did not say this. She agreed. She spent the afternoon in a beautiful room with a man who was physically present and completely unreachable, and she told herself she was overthinking it, that every relationship had quiet days, that the distance she was feeling was exhaustion, an adjustment, and nothing more serious than that. That evening at dinner, he was warmer, attentive again. She exhaled, but that night, while he slept, she did not. She lay in the darkness of the most beautiful room she had ever stayed in and felt something she could not justify and could not shake. The specific unease of a person whose instincts are sending a signal their love has not yet given them permission to receive. At 11:47 p.m., she took her phone into the bathroom. She sent her closest friend a message. It was brief, carefully brief. The specific brevity of a woman who does not want to worry anyone but cannot entirely contain what she is carrying. She said the resort was beautiful. She said she was fine. She said she was probably just tired. And then, at the end, almost as an afterthought that was not an afterthought at all, she wrote, "I don't know why, but I just needed to hear a friendly voice." Her friend replied within minutes. They exchanged several warm messages. Her friend went to sleep reassured. It was the last message she would ever receive from her. She had heard love. She had been given coordinates. The distance between those two things was everything. The last evening began the way all the others had. Dinner at the oceanfront restaurant. The same table he requested every night. Corner position, ocean view, away from the busier center of the dining room, where other couples gathered in the social warmth of a shared holiday. A staff member who had served them every evening would later tell investigators that she had seemed quieter than usual. Not unhappy, just quieter. The kind of quiet that belongs to a person who has been thinking about something they have not yet resolved. He had been attentive. She had ordered dessert. Afterward, they walked back along the path that ran beside the water. A staff member passed them near the garden entrance and said goodnight. She said goodnight back. Her voice was warm and ordinary. He nodded. That was the last verified sighting of her alive. What happened in their room in the hours that followed will not be described in detail, because the detail is not where the story lives. The story lives in what's around it. The dessert she ordered, the good night she returned without knowing it was the last one, the photograph still open on her phone from the messages she had sent home that afternoon. She had been happy enough to send photographs that afternoon. By morning she was gone. He did not call for help immediately. He waited 4 hours before telling the front desk his wife was unwell and asking not to be disturbed. He waited 6 hours before requesting that hotel security be contacted. He waited 9 hours before the door to their room was opened by someone who was not him. Each wait had an explanation. Each explanation was just sufficient. Each hour another door closing between what had happened and when the world would find out. When the door finally opened, the housekeeper who had knocked that morning was standing in the corridor with a security manager and a resort manager and the specific dread of people who have been hoping they are wrong. They were not wrong. He was seated in the chair by the window, composed, already waiting for them with the expression of a man who has been managing a difficult situation and is prepared to explain it to whoever arrives. The resort manager would later tell investigators that his first thought, immediate, involuntary, later confirmed as correct, was that the man in the chair had been waiting longer than 9 hours, that he had been waiting in some essential way since before they arrived. The honeymoon had not ended that morning. It had ended before it began. He had simply been managing the distance between those two facts. When local authorities arrived at the resort, he was cooperative. He explained that she had complained of feeling unwell the previous evening, that he had been concerned but had not wanted to alarm her, that he had let her sleep and gone to breakfast, and when he returned and she still had not stirred, he had grown worried and eventually involved the hotel. It was a clean account, internally consistent, delivered at the correct pace with the correct vocabulary of a man navigating something terrible while trying to hold himself together. But then they kept watching. There were no tears, not in the first interview, not in the second, not in the corridor outside the resort office where he waited between conversations with investigators. Visible through the glass to the officers inside, he sat with his hands in his lap and his expression arranged into something that functioned as grief the way his earlier attentiveness had functioned as love. Technically present, arriving at the correct moments, but missing the specific involuntary quality that distinguishes feeling from performance. Her closest friend, the one who had gone to sleep reassured by those final messages 3 nights earlier, spent the next hour unable to form sentences. Her mother, reached by phone at home, had to be supported by the person standing beside her when the news arrived. Her brother, told in person by a family friend, walked outside and did not come back for 40 minutes. He spent that same window of time asking the resort coordinator practical questions about the process for transporting a body internationally. The questions were specific, informed, asked in the tone of a man managing a logistical problem rather than a man who had just lost his wife. Investigators noted this. They also noted something he introduced himself. In the third interview, unprompted, with the specific timing of a man releasing information he knows will surface and prefers to surface on his own terms, that there was a life insurance policy, that he wanted to be transparent about its existence, that he understood it might look a certain way and wanted investigators to have the full picture. The policy had been taken out 8 months before the wedding. He offered this information with the steadiness of a man who had prepared for this specific conversation. Investigators wrote it down without reacting. And afterward, in the corridor, the lead investigator said to her colleague 4 words that carried the weight of everything they had just watched. "He is not grieving." Her colleague said nothing. They both already knew what the next 72 hours would require. The difference between grief and management is invisible until it isn't. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. They did not move immediately. That is the part that requires patience to understand the specific, disciplined patience of investigators who know what they suspect and understand that suspicion without architecture is nothing. They needed to build something that could not be taken apart by a defense attorney with 3 hours and a reasonable doubt argument. So they built it. The resort security system had recorded more than anyone initially realized. Corridor footage, elevator logs, the restaurant camera that had captured their final dinner from an angle that preserved one detail. A detail about his behavior in the 4 minutes after she excused herself to use the restroom during that last meal that contradicted his account of the evening in a way that was small, specific, and impossible to explain without dismantling the entire timeline he had provided. Her phone gave its own testimony. The message sent from the resort bathroom on the 3rd night, the timestamp, the location data that placed in the bathroom rather than the room, inconsistent with the account he had given of their movements that evening in a way that was precise enough to matter and small enough that he had not thought to account for it. The location data from her phone across the full 5 days painted a portrait of a woman whose movements had become increasingly constrained as the honeymoon progressed. Fewer trips to the resort's communal areas, less time at the pool, more hours in the room, the digital record of an isolation that had been tightening around her in increments too gradual to feel deliberate from the inside, then the financial records, the insurance policy examined in full, its coverage amount, its beneficiary designation, its purchase date positioned 8 months before the wedding with the precision of a man who understood the difference between a policy taken out after marriage and a policy taken out during engagement. The former invites scrutiny. The latter appears routine. The financial records from preceding 3 years assembled a portrait of escalating desperation. Accounts overdrawn, debts restructured, a lifestyle maintained through mechanisms that were running out of room. A man who needed a solution that conventional options could not provide. And then the room itself. Investigators stood in that corner unit at the end of the corridor, the room he had specifically requested 3 weeks before the wedding, away from neighboring rooms, balcony facing the ocean, no adjacent guests, and understood with a certainty that arrives when evidence and instinct reach the same conclusion simultaneously that this room had not been chosen for the view. It had been chosen for what it would allow. The timeline he had managed, the room he had selected, the insurance he had purchased, the isolation he had constructed across months of careful relationship building, the previous woman who had left because something felt wrong and had spent years wondering if she had imagined it. Not one of these elements alone was sufficient. Together they formed something aimed. And what they were aimed at was a woman who believed, with her whole heart and on the best available evidence, that she was simply loved. That is what makes a perfect trap. Not force, not fear. Trust, pointed in one direction and held completely still. After the arrest, investigators went backward. Not to build the case. The case was already built. But because the obligation that falls on people who finally understand what happened requires them to go back and fill in the portrait that was always incomplete, to find the version of him that existed before she met him, to understand not just what he did, but what he had always been. The woman from the previous relationship was located after 2 weeks of careful searching. She agreed to speak. She sat with investigators for 2 hours and answered every question with the careful precision of a woman who had spent years carrying something she had never been able to fully name. When she was done, she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "I left because something felt wrong, and I couldn't explain it. I have spent years wondering if I was imagining it." She had not been imagining it. Investigators showed her the financial records, the pattern of questions he had asked about her accounts, the specific interest he had taken in her assets during the relationship, the way that interest had intensified in the months before she left. She looked at each document with the expression of a woman watching a map appear around a journey she had already taken without knowing where she was going. She had been to the rehearsal. Her instincts had saved her. The financial records from his full history assembled something that no single year of his life had revealed, but that the complete timeline made unmistakable. A man who had been running a performance of stability for long enough that he had lost track of the difference between performance and the person, who had identified in her not a partner, but a solution, who had moved through the relationship with the patience of someone who understood that trust requires time and was willing to invest the time because the return justified it. The journal entry was found during the digital examination of her personal accounts. She had written his words down. I feel most alive when it's just the two of us, away from everyone, like the rest of the world doesn't exist. And beneath them she had written 3 words of her own. He means it. She had believed it as the deepest kind of truth. It had been the deepest kind of plan. And the most unbearable detail in the entire case file, the one the lead investigator would later say stayed longer than the insurance documents, longer than security footage, longer than anything else, was that she had been right to believe it meant something. It meant something, just not what she thought. She had not loved the wrong person. She had loved a person who chose, deliberately and completely, to be the wrong one. He was convicted. The verdict was delivered on a Thursday morning in a courtroom that had been filling since before the doors officially opened. Her family on one side, the evidence on the other, and the man who had planned her final days maintaining throughout the proceedings the same composed expression he had carried through resort interviews and police interrogations in a trial that lasted 3 weeks and dismantled, methodically and completely, every version of events he had offered. The sentence was delivered into a silence so complete that the judge's words seemed to arrive one at a time. He was let out with the same flat expression. The performance, having nowhere left to go, continued anyway, because for a man like this, the performance is not a response to circumstance. It is simply who he is. Her closest friend stood and faced the courtroom. The one who had given the wedding toast, the one who had gone to sleep, was reassured by those final bathroom messages. The one who had spent the months since the arrest returning again and again to that last exchange, and asking herself what she had missed. She did not describe the crime. She described her, the specific laugh. The career was built entirely from her own effort, the way she loved people, completely, without reservation, with the particular generosity of someone who had never learned to do it any other way. The fact that she had been careful, that she had taken her time, that she had said, I don't move until I'm sure, and had meant it, and had been sure and had deserved. Completely, without qualification, without the smallest caveat, to have that certainty honored. The courtroom received every word in complete silence. The man who had not honored it looked at the middle distance throughout, what she deserved, and what this story exists to say without softening is this: love should never require your isolation. The person who loves you does not need you away from everyone who knew you before. Romance is not a reason to lose contact with the people who can see what you cannot see from the inside. And when someone frames your disappearance from your own life as devotion, when being away from everyone becomes a thing that defines your relationship, that is not love describing itself. That is a trap explaining its mechanics. Pay attention to who needs you unreachable. Pay attention to who you become when no one who knew you before is watching. Behind every crime is a lesson. Behind this one, there was a woman who deserved to come home from her honeymoon. Let that be the reason we learn it.